The topic of today's discussion is business cycle. We are going to talk about year-to-year fluctuations in GDP over the years. So let's first start with what does business cycle means. Business cycle simply refers to fluctuation in the economy that happens from year to year. Certain years are good years and certain years are not so good years. So and these ups and downs in the economy is called business cycles. So let's try to understand this concept using the real GDP. So if we plot real GDP of a country over the years, say for the United States, and if we have real GDP on y-axis and years on the x-axis, so this is say 1950 and say this is 2014, and if you plot the numbers you'll see that GDP is kind of like fluctuating, this wavy over the years. The over the years is growing, but when you look at the particular years, say like if we look at say in this time period, say time period here to here, so there's a decrease in GDP this time period, and that's a decrease. On the other hand, if you look at it this time period, there's a clear increase in GDP. So this tops is called peaks and this bare bottoms is called trough, and this movement from peak to trough is a recessionary time period. On the other hand, this movement from trough to peak is an expansionary time period. So let's try to understand this concept using a real life actual real GDP of the United States. So here I have plotted actual real gross domestic product for the US for the last 70 years, and what we can see here, the overall GDP or real GDP, that is inflation adjusted GDP, has increased, but it's not a smooth increase. There have been years of serious decline in GDP. On the other hand, this is the year of huge increase in GDP. Again, this is a small decrease in GDP, again is followed by huge increase in GDP. So this ups and downs in GDP from year to year is known as business cycle. So in this graph, this shaded region, this one, this, all these shaded regions are recessions that we experienced in past years. And you can see it's a very frequent occurrence. It happens pretty frequently. The last recession was happened in 2007. So the Great Recession that we popularly known as started in December of 2007 and continued till June of 2009. So in this is this time period. Let's first define what this expansion means. Often we use the word expansion or recession. So let's start defining expansion. So an economic expansion is an increase in the level of economic activity and of the goods and services available. It is a period of economic growth as measured by a rise in real GDP. So expansion is time when GDP increases, which essentially means we are producing more. If we are producing more, that we get to consume more. This is a time when we experience huge increase in standard of living. Just opposite to this expansion, we have recessions. A recession is a significant decline in economic activity spread across the economy, lasting for more than a few months. Okay, it has to last for more than a few months, and it's normally observed in real GDP, real income, employment, industrial production, and wholesale and retail sales. So these are some of the key indicators. So real GDP is a real income, employment, industrial production, and wholesale retail sales. These are key indicators that fluctuates over time because of ups and downs in the economy. The important question rises, who determines when the recession has started and when it ended? Actually, in the US, we have a not-for-profit organization called National Bureau of Economic Research, and it's a group of top economists in the United States, and they have a subcommittee called Business Cycle Dating Subcommittee. So their job is to date these business cycles, and they decide when the recession has started and when it ended, and it's often taken as a very credible source of information for business cycle. In their website, they have all the days starting from the middle of the 19th century when the recession started and when it ended. Now let's talk about real GDP. Now, till now, I just showed you how real GDP kind of fluctuated from year to year. And we have seen lots of fluctuation in the GDP based on which year you are looking at. But real GDP is not the only macroeconomic variable that fluctuates. There are other macroeconomic variables as well that fluctuate significantly because of business cycles. And these other macroeconomic variables are consumption, investment, employment or unemployment, industrial production, and wholesale and retail trade sales. All of these variables fluctuate significantly because of ups and downs in the economy. So let's look at some actual data. So let's look at data for investment. This is gross private domestic investment from year to year, and you can see during recessionary time period, this is the Great Recession, and we can see a significant decline in investment during this time period. Similarly, that happened to the recession that happened in 2001. Same thing. We have seen significant decline in investment, in all the prior recession. So important point to take out from here is this: during recession, typically private domestic investment decreases in an economy, and it's obvious when people don't have income, they can't purchase, so companies are not willing to invest more, and as a result investment decreases. Or in 2007-2009 recession or the Great Recession, it was primarily carried by housing crisis, so people didn't build new homes. As a result, there was a huge decline in home production, and as a result, home is counted as an investment. As a result, investment declined, as you can see here. What about unemployment? Let's look at the unemployment. This data plots unemployment rate in percentages from year to year. During recessions, as expected, we can see a huge increase in unemployment. Yes, significant. On the other hand, during good times, we typically see a decline in unemployment rate. So expansionary periods are often marked by decrease in unemployment, and recessions are marked by increase in unemployment rate. Now I would like to spend some time talking about pro-cyclical versus counter-cyclical. Pro-cyclical. Pro-cyclical are any quantity that tends to increase when the overall economy is growing is classified as pro-cyclical. Like GDP or gross domestic product is an example of pro-cyclical economic indicator. So in this case, say if we go back to our GDP data, GDP is always increasing during expansionary time periods and is decreasing during that when it's recession, and is increasing during expansionary time period. On the other hand, we have a concept called counter-cyclical. What does counter-cyclical means? It means quantities that tend to increase when the overall economy is slowing down, and these are classified as counter-cyclical. Unemployment is an example of counter-cyclical variable. So in this, again, if you go back to unemployment, during recessions, we see an increase in unemployment. During good times, we see a decrease in unemployment. So decrease in unemployment happens when in the good times, when economy is expanding. And good times, unemployment decreases. So as economy goes up, as GDP increases, unemployment decreases. On the other hand, during the bad times, when there's a decrease in GDP, unemployment increases. That's why it's counter-cyclical, because it goes against the trend. My next concept that I want to discuss today in this concept of short run versus long run macroeconomics. Now, those who have taken microeconomy, that's econ 101, principles of microeconomy, you know what's the difference in short run and long run. In the long run, all the factors of production are variable, but in the short run, some of the factors of production are fixed. The concept of long run in macroeconomy is a little different. It includes the substitutability of factors of production like land, labor, and capital, but it also includes something related with price level. So in the long run, price level for the economy is completely flexible, which means that prices do change over time in long run. In the short run, you may have situations when prices may not be changing. Let's take an example. Suppose you go to your grocery store. Often in grocery stores, they change their prices once in a week or once in 2 weeks. So this is a classic case where prices are not very flexible. Or think about a labor contract. Often labor contracts are signed for a year. During that time, it's very difficult to change the labor contract, and wages are typically fixed for a year. It does not move significantly during the contract time period. And that's the classic case of fixed price level. On the other hand, in the long run in macroeconomics, all the prices are variable along with full mobility of factors of production. That means factors of production can increase, decrease depending on the needs, and also substitutability between factors of production. Next concept I want to talk about is the concept of potential GDP or full employment level of output, natural rate of output. What is potential GDP? Is the production of goods and services that an economy achieves in the long run when unemployment at its normal rate. Now remember, when we did the concept of unemployment, we talked about natural rate of unemployment, natural rate of unemployment. So natural rate of unemployment studied was around 5%. If unemployment is below natural rate, it's very good. If it goes above 5%, or which is the natural rate, 5% is the natural rate, it's considered as a negative sign. So it's a way to say that if our economy uses all its resources optimally, how much we will be producing, how much goods and services we can produce in an economy, or how much should be our GDP using all the resources optimally in an economy. So let's try to understand this concept using, again, data for the United States. In this graph, you can see there are two lines. This red line is called potential GDP. And this blue line is our real GDP. So potential GDP talks about how much our economy should be producing ideally, and real GDP is what actually we have achieved. So in this case, for example, in the years since the recession, what we can see, there's a huge gap in potential GDP and actual real GDP. We can have the other way around. We have a situation here right around towards the end of the 1990s, when our actual GDP was more than potential GDP. You may ask the question, how come the potential GDP be more than, or actual GDP be more than potential GDP? Well, this can happen. Think about what you do prior to the exams. The night before the exams, perhaps most of you are studying 12 to 15 hours a day. Can you carry on like this, studying for the whole semester or for the whole year? Perhaps not. So when our real GDP is above the potential GDP, that's the sign that we are overusing or overutilizing our resources, which is also not good. On the other hand, if our actual GDP is below the potential GDP, that's a sign that we are underutilizing our resources. That means we are not putting in enough efforts to produce goods and services. Either way, whether we are above the potential or below the potential is problematic. What we should be as close as possible to the potential GDP. That's what a normal output should look like. So related to this concept is the output gap. Output gap is the difference between real GDP and potential GDP. And it's a very good measure of how well our economy is doing. And often the aim of the policymakers is to fulfill this gap. If our real GDP is more than potential GDP, that means economy is overheating. That means we are trying to overutilize our resources, which is not good. On the other hand, if this output gap is negative, negative output gap implies potential GDP greater than real GDP. Now that's also problematic. Why that's problematic? Obviously, we are not utilizing our resources. We can do better, which essentially means we can utilize our resources more, which often means if our potential GDP is more than real GDP, that means we have significant unemployment because resources are not properly utilized. So that kind of takes us to our next question: what can we do to fulfill this or fill this gap between real GDP and potential GDP? And that's where comes the policies and government's role that we'll be talking about in our following lecture.